if you don't have some of these basic security solutions in place, you're not meeting what I refer to as the security poverty line. So you're putting yourself, your organization, your employees, your shareholders at a heightened undue risk.
You're listening to the Small Business Mastermind, a podcast created to help small businesses juggle business, finance, health, and wellness. I'm your host, Morgan Berna. If you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to rate, review, or follow the podcast. The Small Business Mastermind is brought to you by Olympia Benefits. To learn how you can reduce your health and dental costs, visit olympiabenefits.com. Hello, and thank you for tuning into this episode of the Small Business Mastermind. This episode is part 2 in our cybersecurity series with Dominik Vogel of CyberSC. On this episode, we talk about keeping your email safe, the common cybersecurity myths Dominik hears, how the cyber risk landscape has changed as a result of COVID-19, how to handle the risks associated with having a remote workforce, ways to make sure your website is safe for visitors, why stress puts us at an increased risk for cybercrime, and how an employee can talk to management about cybersecurity. If you haven't yet, I'd recommend giving part 1 a listen as well, although you can listen to them in either order. It will be the episode that was released just before this one. So with that, I hope you enjoy this one, and let's jump right into the conversation. I'll be checking in with you again at the end of the episode. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely, Maura. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
As founder and chief strategist at CyberSC, Dominik Vogel holds a proven track record within the cybersecurity community across a multitude of industries. Dominik actively participates in the Vancouver security community and is a well-respected cybersecurity expert for appearing on media news outlets across North America and internationally on BBC World News. Dominik is highly regarded as a cybersecurity thought leader and was recently appointed to the BC Provincial Cybersecurity Advisory Committee. He focuses much of his energy on providing strategic security leadership to technology startups and small and mid-sized businesses to proactively solve their cyber risk challenges. He strives to provide practical cybersecurity advice to his clients and actively turn the security consulting world upside down. Okay, so today we're talking some general safety, website safety myths, and new security measures that have come out as a result of COVID. On our previous episode, we talked a lot about what the threats are, how to avoid them, and we're going to go into some more detail today. So let's start off giving a bit of context for companies that may not have experienced this type of scenario. So what can the impacts be if a company is hit by a cyber attack?
Oh, good question. Yeah, you're hitting hard right from the get-go. So
making you work.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd ease me in. No, the when we're talking about the ramifications of this, and again, it's very much what I refer to almost as a continuum, in which sometimes it can just be a mild nuisance, in which you have a piece of like a virus or malware, and you need to get it removed from one computer, and it's like I said, it's more of a nuisance, and it doesn't really affect the business or the organization. But then as you go down that continuum, it can lead to many systems being knocked out. It could lead to the entire business organization being completely locked out in the case of something like ransomware, unable to do business. And then if you, as an organization, if you lose a day or two revenue, what does that mean? There's many SMBs that can, if they go down for a day or two, that could bring them to their knees, kind of thing. Even just for a few hours. So very much, I would say, cyber risk has evolved from being sort of a mild nuisance to being something which is very much an existential risk and threat for SMBs.
And I just suggest for anyone giving this episode a listen to make sure they've checked out our previous episode as well that we did about cybersecurity, because we went into a ton of information there about ransomware and what exactly that looks like. I wanted to ask you a bit about email, because this is something every business uses. Can you let me know a bit of the common risks email faces and some ways we can mitigate these?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple items in email that I think people should keep an eye on. So the first one I would say is making sure that you leverage multi-factor authentication. I believe we talked about that in the first one, but if not, I'll just quickly reset on that. My memory is not what it used to be. I can barely remember what I had for breakfast. But so, especially with small, mid-sized organizations, many of them leverage third-party cloud services like Microsoft Office 365 or Google G Business Suite email for their company or their organizational email. Now, when it's leveraging something that's external, what's referred to as externally facing, or anyone on the internet can access, you need to go above and beyond just username and passwords. Unfortunately, usernames and passwords are compromised all over the place. People reuse their passwords all over the place, so you have to go on the assumption that your username and password is compromised. And that's where something like multi-factor authentication, that's basically where you'll get a SMS, like a text message code, or you'll get something to a phone call or something with which is tied to what's referred to as an authenticator app. Basically, it's a one-time code which you will enter in as part of your login process. So even if your username and password is compromised, unless someone physically has access to your phone, as an example, they won't be able to access your account. And multi-factor authentication right now is one of the most effective risk mitigation techniques when it comes to email security and preventing what's referred to as account takeovers or having your account compromised. So I highly, highly recommend that to your listeners. That, again, if they don't need to necessarily know the details of how to roll that out, but they should be engaging their IT team or their IT managed service provider and outright demanding that MFA be a multi-factor authentication be enabled and be configured. The other risk when it comes to email use is, and sort of the particular threat which we're seeing is referred to as BEC, or business email compromise. And again, something like this can often be mitigated by multi-factor authentication, but this particular threat of business email compromise, and this is something which is running rampant through the SMB community, is where it's an email where the CEO's email account or a CFO or a VP of finance, either their account has been compromised or their account is being what's referred to as spoofed. So someone's pretending to be them. And what that often takes the shape of is it looks like it's a wire transfer request. It looks like it's coming from the CEO saying, please send a wire transfer for $50K to this new vendor. And often this is the way that scammers and fraudsters take advantage of the relative immaturity of a lot of these SMBs when it comes to their wire transfer process. This scam doesn't really work with larger organizations because there tends to be multiple layers of authorization, which multiple people need to sign off if a wire transfer is being sent for something over like 5K or 10K. That level of process maturity doesn't exist with SMBs, and we see that time and time again. That and again, this isn't really a technical compromise per se, but it's almost a psychological compromise in which many people, especially if it's going to someone in accounts payable or someone on the finance team, they often won't think twice if they see an email that looks like it's come from the CEO or CFO. They've conditioned themselves to just act on it. And one of the most effective techniques that you can do to mitigate that, apart from multi-factor authentication, is to, just like I said, have a little more procedural maturity. So anytime a wire transfer request comes in over, let's say, 5K, you can define that for your own organization's risk tolerance, but whenever that comes in, there needs to be another level of sign-off. So either someone else has to approve that, or you validate that request through another communication channel. So if that request came in through email, maybe you connect with them through the company's instant messaging platform, or you send them a text, or you call them, or you send a carrier pigeon, whatever you want. But you validate it through another communication channel.
And this is something I didn't put on the list, so sorry for making you think so early in the morning. But I'm curious if you'd suggest people using a VPN.
Yes. Not necessarily in the context of email. Email for many small, mid-sized organizations is already hosted by someone other than themselves. So it's hosted by Microsoft, it's hosted by Google. So a VPN there doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of improving the security outcomes, shall we say.
Okay.
Where a VPN is super useful is if let's say you're working remotely. And again, this is very true, especially now during COVID with a very virtualized workforce. So this is a timely question in which how you're connecting. Let's say there's a server or some systems back in the office, within the office physical wall, so to speak, that you need to be able to access to perform your job. A VPN allows for a much more secure connection, and VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, in which that allows you to just connect back to your company or organization's internal network and securely access any systems or any files securely, rather than trying to use some other insecure remote access method. VPNs very much allow for a much more secured level of connection. And same thing with email. You should be making sure that how you connect is done through a username and password, as well as a multi-factor authentication.
Okay. And then the other thing I had that will be something common to just about any small medium business is tips for internet browsing and just identifying if the website you're on is a safe website.
Yes.
Do you have some tips there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I often tell a lot of our clients as well is that these are all great questions in which, to me, serve as a start for great dialogue that you should be having with your IT team or your IT service provider. And because this is in this day and age, it's becoming basic table stakes. If you don't have some of these basic security solutions in place, you're not meeting what I refer to as the security poverty line. You're putting yourself, your organization, your employees, your shareholders at a heightened undue risk. And especially with something around web filtering, that can be something which can be done quite easily, quite readily. There's some really fantastic solutions. I know something from OpenDNS, which is, or even Cisco. Cisco has a great solution called Cloud Umbrella. Getting into the technical specifics of it, I think isn't something which SMB owners or SMB executives need to fret about. I think what's important, though, is understanding that in this day and age, unfiltered web access just increases the likelihood that you'll be hit by a cyber attack by a significant margin. It's almost what I refer to as basic cyber hygiene. In which if you're not brushing your teeth and eating the right foods and some moderate level of exercise, you're asking for trouble, kind of thing. And that to me is where we are with something like web filtering. If you allow for completely unfiltered web access, forget if people can be wasting their time or accessing inappropriate materials. That's more of an HR issue than a security issue. But if they are then going into areas which could be infected with viruses, and if there isn't a web filter in place to filter the web traffic to make sure that there isn't any viruses or malware on that traffic, again, it's in this day and age, it's basic table stakes.
And then on the other side, a lot of companies use, say, Shopify or WordPress to create their own website. Do you have some tips for these people, to maybe your questions to bring to their IT to make sure that their website is safe for visitors as well?
Yeah, good question, Morgan. When we're, I think what's really great about the advance of those types of services is that it does allow organizations to be able to create relatively robust websites out of the gate and not having to sort of fool around with it themselves. So, I think that's really fantastic. I think where the key question that should be brought up is, how are these websites being maintained? I don't mean in terms of content, but in terms of security updates. Many of these websites can be built on a platform called WordPress. And WordPress leverages a whole bunch of things called plugins. And these plugins are almost like mini applications. And if they're not properly updated, again, they just become an invitation for cyber criminals and cyber attackers to just try and bring down your website or get unauthorized access or what have you. So that's a key question in terms of how is the security of the website maintained month over month, year over year kind of thing.
Yeah, and it can get really disorganized with all the plugins. I've worked a bit with WordPress, and
it can be even for a website that doesn't seem very fancy. It's shocking in terms of how many WordPress plugins there are. With our website, our company website, it wasn't anything fancy, and we went for something fairly standard. And then we were looking at the number of plugins. I was blown away. I was like, how can there be like dozens of different plugins that are that we're using right now? So
and then they all need to be updated, and it can be confusing.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that to me again is what I refer to as low hanging fruit. There's no shortage of, and that's where we're seeing a lot of website attacks right now, because a lot of organizations, if they are thinking about security, they're maybe just focusing internally, and they're totally forgetting about their website. Your website is still very much an entry point and needs to be protected.
Okay, so let's move on to common myths. So can you let me know some of the common myths you hear around cybersecurity? Maybe just some things you want people to know.
Yeah, well, one of my, I'd say one of the most common myths that I hear, and that frustrates me to no end, is when we're talking to someone, an SMB leader, and they say, "Oh, cybersecurity, our IT guy handles that, or that's on our IT MSP. We don't worry about that." And the myth there is that you can't outsource cyber risk. You can outsource the operational aspect of cybersecurity, and that's completely true. A lot of SMBs don't have the in-house talent to be able to handle the operational aspect of cybersecurity. But the risk and the need to have the sufficient due diligence, oversight, and governance, that falls on the business. That falls on the executives. They are not fulfilling their fiduciary duties if they just say, "Oh, our IT department handles that." That's not how it works. And in the event of a data breach or a significant security incident, and if there's legal matters that follow that, if it's shown that as a CEO or CFO that you just hand that off to your IT service provider, you will be, lack of a better term, you'll have your butt handed to you. It's negligent, and that's why I think it's so important that people understand that this is not a technical problem. This is not. So many people equate cybersecurity with being the domain of IT. Technology is a part of it. Don't get me wrong, but that's all it is. It is a part of it. At the end of the day, cybersecurity and cyber risk is an extension of enterprise and business risk management. It's not the domain of IT. So I think that's something which is a very common myth. And another sort of similar myth to that is that, oh, we have cyber insurance. We don't need to worry about it. And to me, that's like saying, oh, well, I have fire insurance, so I'm going to throw a whole bunch of old wood and stuff all over my house, and I'm going to walk around lighting matches all day, and I'm going to disconnect my smoke alarms and not going to have a fire extinguisher. Cyber insurance isn't a catch-all, and it blows my mind that people think like this. We even see people who understand risk management think that they can fully outsource the risk. Anyone who understands the basic tenets of risk management is that you need to first address the residual risk. You need to take steps to mitigate and lower that risk as much as humanly possible. Whatever you can't mitigate further, that's what's referred to as the residual risk. Then you can leverage cyber insurance to insure against that residual risk. And furthermore, if you're not taking any steps proactively to deal with cybersecurity, and let's say you get hit by a breach, and you try to get your cyber insurance, and we've seen this countless times, your insurance provider will say, "Hey, you know what? You guys did jack all in terms of cybersecurity, so your cyber insurance is void." And we've seen this. People come to us literally crying, saying, "We thought we had insurance and we didn't." And I said, "Well, you did have the insurance, you just didn't read the fine print." So those are two, I'd say, are the most common and prevailing, and if not as well, dangerous myths and mindsets to have right now.
I wanted to just clarify something with the first one you said. So you were saying you can't fully rely on IT. Do you mean that we need to have like a second cybersecurity team, or do you mean that the leaders, management themselves need to be doing things for cybersecurity?
Yeah, no, I want to be careful with the wording there. I mean, you can rely on your IT service provider, your IT provider, or your IT team, but from an operational perspective. At the end of the day, you still have to give guidance and hold the IT team and the IT service provider accountable by asking the right questions. If you don't know what questions to ask, that's a different story. That's where people and companies like ours come in, and we advise, and then we own the cyber risk portfolio, because many SMB leaders, they may be specialists in their business, in their sector, in finance, in operations, but there's a gap in cyber risk leadership. And that's where sort of our type of service comes in hand, because then we're able to help ask the right questions and make sure that from a governance and accountability perspective, that the executives are able to demonstrate that they have performed due diligence and that they have fulfilled their fiduciary duties to protect the organization.
Okay, yeah, got it. Are you willing to share a few of the reasons why people come to you and your company?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that there's a few common scenarios. The first one is well referred to as after the breach, or when literally when there's fire burning everywhere, or after the earth has been completely scorched. So they'll come to us, say, we barely got through this. We're not sure what happened, but we know we don't want to go through this again. So basically, it's almost like like a restoration service, in which we'll say, okay, let's look at things, the cybersecurity risk environment in terms of what you were doing, what you weren't doing, and then we'll focus on pragmatic and prioritized recommendations to again lower the inherent risk that was in many cases left unaddressed. So that's one common scenario. Another scenario, and this is particularly true with B2B, so business to business organizations, where they'll come to us and they'll say, one of our largest clients or one of our largest customers is asking for more proof around how we do cybersecurity, and we've been telling them for years that we have a cybersecurity program or that we take cybersecurity seriously, but in fact we've been doing nothing. Please help us, because if we lose this client, that's 50% of our revenue.
Oh, yikes!
And that's a very, very common scenario right now. Like I said, particularly with a lot of B2B organizations. I think the broader trend there is that the larger organizations are clamping down on vendor risk management and supply chain risk. So they're wanting to make sure that they are battening down the hatches in terms of potential weak spots. And a weak spot for many large organizations is the connections that they have with their supply chain. So that's a big, big item right there. And it's funny which those two scenarios are still very reactive. I would, as a practitioner in cybersecurity, I would love to see people be more proactive about this. But right now, it seems the market seems to be heavily driven in reactive scenarios when it comes to investing in cybersecurity and cyber risk management.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what are the reasons you wish people came to you?
Yeah. Well, the and it's funny. I don't think I shared this story when we talked last time, but when we were dealing with a prospect and they're sharing this story, this lady who was widowed, and she said, this company's been around for something like 60 years, and it was her husband's company. He built it up from nothing. She was continuing on in his legacy. She'd been the CEO for a few years. She said, I had to learn about this, just thought on the go. And she shared with me that, and this is why we were meeting with her, she said a few months ago that they were hit by ransomware and that they were inoperable for weeks. She told me, she said, we literally came within days of having to shut down the company for good. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about that, and let's see, we'll tell you more about our services. And we shared our services and what we did and what we do. And when she looked over our proposal and such, she said, well, I was hoping to maybe pay, looking at paying $500 a month. And I said, let me get this straight. Your husband's legacy, which you told me was super important to you, the fact that you almost lost that, you came within a day or two worth of time of losing everything. You're telling me that that's worth $500 a month. And to me, what really annoys me is that there's that disconnect in terms of that expectation of cost versus what that means to the organization. And to me, it's like, okay, well, if you had invested in cybersecurity, and again, what we're offering isn't something which is, I'm saying, you have to drop 100 G's on us. It's very much what I would say is fair market value. And there's, like I said, there's that disconnect in which people still think, oh, this is something which I really don't want to have to buy. I want to try and minimize the cost on it. They see it as a cost center. And I always say to people, you know what? We're in a digital age. Whether you like it or not, we're in a digital economy. And unless you sell tacos out of the back of your mother's Volvo in all cash deals, you're dealing with data and you are a digital organization. Especially during COVID, you are a virtual organization. with that comes incredibly heightened cyber risk. Either you do nothing about that and your company just goes by the wayside and you cease to exist, or you do basic table stakes when it comes to cybersecurity, or as we mentioned last time, you invest in it, and as the digital economy gets stronger and stronger, it becomes a source of competitive differentiation. That mindset of needing to not see cybersecurity as a cost center, but rather as a business enabler in a digital age. That's why I would love people would come to us saying, we are investing in digital transformation. Yeah. We are investing in understanding that we are trying to propel our organization to succeed in this digital economy. We want to invest in cybersecurity because we know that's paramount to us being successful in this digital transformation journey. If just one prospect came to me and said that, I would die a happy man.
Do you think that the reason people don't is that there's some fear in just not fully understanding it, not wanting to dive into it because, people get a little kind of concerned with all the terminology and not understanding everything about computers and not really knowing what to ask for? Do you think that's a pain point?
I'd say that it's still a fundamental lack of understanding and awareness, and that's why, part of my mission is to just go on podcasts like this to be able to speak to non-technical people, speak to business leaders to really help them better understand what cybersecurity is. The reason there are still so many prevailing myths, the reason why it's still so unknown is that. And this is a failing on the part of my industry and my colleagues, and obviously myself as well, is that we have not done enough to make this relevant and tangible to those who are non-techie and non-security people. So I think that's sort of where we are right now. We have to further demystify. That's why I'm so grateful to you for giving me this platform to further help that awareness. And over time, as we increase that level of awareness, I think we'll see greater levels of acceptance and understanding, and seeing cybersecurity, like I said, rather than a cost center, seeing it as a true business enabler. So it's through these types of grassroots initiatives, I think, that we'll see that sea of change.
Yeah, I think it can be just tough to know where to even look for this type of stuff. So I think hopefully this chat is helpful for everyone listening. You've mentioned a couple times that with COVID, there's been some increased risk. People are going virtual with a lot of businesses. Have there been new security measures that have come out during this time? Have things changed at all in the industry?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say that necessarily security has changed. I think what has happened is that there have been new items or new risks which have bubbled to the surface, which many SMBs are not prepared to deal with. So one of the first ones was, and we sort of talked about it earlier, was about remote access. Many SMBs were not prepared to have their entire workforce work remotely. That wasn't really a problem for most enterprises. Most large organizations have had remote access solutions in place for years. Most SMBs, maybe one or two people, maybe just some key executives had the ability to work remotely, but certainly not everyone. And in that rush to make that happen, there was this focus on functionality, and a lot of, let's say, insecure remote access solutions were rolled out. And I think that's a key item right now, is that because we're seeing, COVID is going to still be here for at least the foreseeable future, at least 6+ months out. SMBs need to take this opportunity to understand that they need to further, let's say, make permanent their remote access solutions, and they use this opportunity to make it as robust and resilient as possible, and not just rely on a Band-Aid solution. So that's one item, and we've seen increased cyber risks around remote access because cyber criminals know and have seen that in that rush to deploy it, many of these remote access solutions were done insecurely, and they're taking full advantage of that. So that's item number one. Item number two has been that we've seen a huge increase in phishing activity, and scam emails being sent out, and yeah, like a ton, and it's huge. I've never seen an increase like this in my career, and one of the reasons, again, is that psychological reason that scammers and cyber criminals and fraudsters know that people are overwhelmed, they're stressed, they're tired, they're pulling a million different directions. They're looking at their email while their kids are screaming at them and climbing all over them. And they know that this is the perfect psychological environment to make to be successful with these types of phishing and scam messages. So we're at that point as well, and so one of the things that we're advocating to businesses and to organizations is to tell their staff, tell their employees, rather than just trying to inform them about, here's the latest threat and all this thing. That's adding more to the plate. What we're seeing is something being more powerful is to just allow staff and allow your employees, give them the gift of pause or the gift of mindfulness. Telling people, you know what, if you get an email, you don't have to action it right away. It's okay to just, if you need a few hours off, take the few hours off kind of thing. And we've seen that organizations that are empowering their users and empowering their employees to be more mindful, that they actually they're less susceptible to these phishing scams. So I think there's a really interesting dynamic there to sort of preach that with your employees and staff.
That's a great point. I think I could launch into a whole batch of questions about that alone. But yeah, trying to take some of that stress off because you don't want people in such a reactive mode.
Exactly. And again, you don't want to add more to the plate. People are already overwhelmed. Why add more to that? Add more noise. Give them the gift, like I said, of something like mindfulness.
Mm-hmm. Do you have tips for training employees on cybersecurity? And I'm curious if you recommend things like monitoring employees' computers or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that could be a whole separate podcast onto its own there, Morgan. But
quick tips.
One of the things that I do advocate is if you're not doing any level of cybersecurity awareness, I think it's very important to be at least doing something. And there's a really great solution. It's often free or very low cost for SMBs, and it's a security awareness platform called Wizer, Wizer. It's one of my personal favorites. I recommend it to all our clients who don't have a security awareness platform or program in place. It does a really great job of again, rather trying to overwhelm you with like an hour awareness session every year, which is often very useless in terms of it being helping in terms of creating more positive security outcomes. They take more of a micro content point of view, and you're able to maybe have people engage with a 1 or 2 minute video once a week. It's almost like this trickle effect. And if you just engage with that type of material once or twice a week in a short frequency, but on a longer time period, that has much more sustaining power in terms of affecting positive change. So that's something which I think is a really important thing right now to do. And another one is to look at, in the long term, if your staff and your employees are going to be connecting to your internal network with their personal devices, with personal laptops, what have you, organizations need to start planning and budgeting for solutions that can, for lack of a better term, perform a minimal health check on those types of devices. So if something is a company device, it's able to access the internal network, as an example. But if it's a personal device and there's no visibility on it, then you need to this health check in terms of, we need to check that it has up-to-date security updates, that has a running antivirus or anti-malware solution. It's almost like during COVID right now, to enter a store, you have to wear a mask. Maybe there's a forehead temperature check. You have to wash your hands with with detergent, with a cleaning gel or sanitizer, what have you. That's, I think, is a very important thing moving forward as well.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned a couple there, and you've mentioned a few through this episode. I was wondering if there's products or services you recommend everyone has on their computers. You'd mentioned an authenticator app, obviously CyberSC as a service, but I was wondering if there's any others.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things which I recommend, especially what we see with a lot of SMBs, is that they like having Mac laptops. It wasn't that long ago where didn't matter what type of business, they were all Windows laptops or Windows machines, but it's a different age now, and Mac laptops by default don't have an anti-malware, antivirus solution. So I highly recommend downloading one, and there's some really great free ones, which are you're able to use it, particularly for very small organizations. If you get past a certain threshold, you have to pay, but I mean, it's still quite inexpensive in the grand scheme of things. But Sophos, Sophos, so Sophos antivirus for Mac, freely downloadable, one of my preferred options for any of our Mac users with our clients. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Again, it's helping to make sure that you're doing some basic cyber hygiene, basic cybersecurity mechanisms in place.
And there was that myth that Macs can't get viruses. I'm sure you've heard that. And I used to believe it, and I had a Mac, and then one day some wonky stuff started happening, and I was like, ooh, this is wrong.
I'll try not to get onto my soapbox, because that was always one of my favorite rants when someone asked that question and said, "Oh, I have a Mac, I don't have to worry about this." Nothing made me happier than tearing that person apart. But the understanding this from an economics point of view. Not to say Macs are inherently more safe or unsafe compared to Windows. One can argue Windows, because they've had to go through so much and they've been a consistent target, one could argue that they're more secure than the Mac. But the reason why Macs weren't really, had that appearance of being more secure is actually rooted in economics. So if you think about cyber criminals, cybercrime, they are trying to perpetrate and commit the most effective crimes possible. And up until, let's say, the past 3 or 4 years, the majority of business machines worldwide were Windows machines, like 99% of them. So if you're going to be crafting certain code or certain attacks, are you going to be focusing on 1% of all business assets? No, you're going to be focusing on the majority asset to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of committing these crimes. Now, over the past 5 years in particular, we've seen that change drastically, especially with SMBs, where now Macs take 15-20% market share, if not higher, in the business space. Now it makes more economic sense for cyber criminals to commit crimes and try and commit and craft certain code to be able to hack into Macs. And that's why over the past few years we went from seeing 0 Mac attacks to seeing quite a few. Like I said, it's all rooted in basic economics.
That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of it like that. The next one is, if someone is an employee and they're looking to discuss cybersecurity needs with their leadership team, what questions would you suggest they bring to that team?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question. One of the things which I think is important, and I know we've talked about both of them, so I'll just summarize them quickly, is I think the need for awareness. If as an employee, if you're not feeling like you're being kept informed in terms of what cyber threats you should be aware of or what's facing the organization, you should bring that up to your management. That's a very, very important thing to know, especially for frontline staff. I think that's an important thing to have a conversation with your management on. The second one is making sure that if you're working remotely, especially in this day and age, that you're able to connect securely. And again, if you're not sure if that's happening, you should be having that discussion with your management. And the third one would be what I refer to as secure data handling processes or guidelines. So many people don't know, is this particular type of data considered sensitive? Am I allowed to send it through email? Some of them will just send it through email and not even think twice about that. That's a third one, which I think absolutely needs to be well understood by employees, and that needs to be communicated from management. What type of data should we be treating very, very carefully, and what are the approved mechanisms for sort of moving it from point A to point B? Awesome.
Those are great tips. That is the end of the questions I have for you. I want to thank you for letting me put you through the ringer on these last couple episodes. But I did want to check if there was anything you wanted to leave as sort of a final comment about this before you talk about your services or anything I haven't touched on.
Well, and Morgan, first off, I love the depth and breadth of the questions you've asked. I think,
Thank you.
and asked it in the way in which we're making this resonate with your audience, because it's very easy to just talk tech talk when it comes to cybersecurity, and I've seen that time and time again, where you have even my colleagues talk to a business audience, and people's eyes start glazing over. It's like when I'm listening to my mother-in-law, I just zone out, and it's so important to be able to connect with sort of that business and non-technical audience in a way that will make it compelling and truly help them understand what we're dealing with. And like I said, this is very much a failing, not so much on the SMB side. I think it's a failing on the cybersecurity industry as a whole, that we've done a very poor job of making this well understood, in particular by the SMB community.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I think hopefully everyone listening is kind of getting a clearer image. This was not a topic I knew anything about, so I really appreciate you making it easy. And obviously you're extremely knowledgeable, so let's plug your company, your services. If anyone's looking to get in touch, let them know how.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that, Morgan. And again, I pride myself on being a conduit and a connector. Even if your audience or people listening just have a quick question, they can send it to me. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm crazy active there. Reach out through our company website, cyber.sc. Reach out through my email, dvogel@cyber.sc. I'm always happy to just, I'm a firm believer in needing to do more for the community and make them more aware. I'm not going to just answer a question and send you an invoice for $20K. I'm very much a believer in trying to help people better understand cyber risk and what it means to their organization. So I always love it when people reach out. And again, in terms of what we do, if your organization is, like I said, if in the aftermath of a data breach or ransomware incident, or if you're seeing that your clients and your customers are holding your company to a higher standard when it comes to cybersecurity, or if you're worried about cyber risk or cybersecurity and if your organization should be doing more, or how to hold your IT team or your IT service provider more accountable when it comes to cybersecurity. These are all reasons why you should reach out. I like to say that we provide cyber risk leadership, and that we serve as trusted advisors to CEOs, business owners, CFOs, COOs. If you at your organization, you're ultimately responsible for cybersecurity and cyber risk, and you know nothing about it, you should reach out to us.
Fantastic. And just for everyone listening, I'll be linking everything down in the description below, so you can take a look there if you didn't catch that as well. Well, thank you so much for doing these 2 episodes. This has been really fun.
I've had a blast, Morgan. This was a lot of fun.
It's great. Yeah. And maybe we'll do something again in the future. If any listeners have more topics they'd like us to cover, please feel free to send those in to me as well. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Like I said, I'm truly humbled to have had the opportunity to be on the podcast. I had a ton of fun chatting with you, and I would love to be a recurring guest. Let's do this again soon.
Let's do it. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Small Business Mastermind. I hope you found it helpful and have enjoyed our cybersecurity series. A reminder, if you haven't yet, to give part 1 a listen. It is the episode we posted just before this one. And a huge thank you to our guest, Dominik Vogel of Cyber SC. Please check out the podcast description for all of his information and links. For our listeners on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, please consider taking a moment to rate, review, or follow the podcast. It really helps grow the show and allow us to bring on great guests like Dominik. All right, we'll be back again soon with a new episode, but until then, thank you again for tuning in, and I'll be talking to you again very soon.